Ladies and gentlemen, Rangers fans everywhere, we might have a Will Culie problem.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1342 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we are less than 24 hours away from the start of unrestricted free agency as I am recording this podcast right here today, and we got a lot to talk about. The biggest thing is the looming threat that there could be an offer sheet incoming for Will Culie, and that will put the Rangers in a little bit of a pickle. I think they should be able to maneuver their way around it and make sure that Will Culie, stays a New York Ranger for the foreseeable future. But we're going to talk about that. Also going to be talking a little bit about the Rangers' approach to free agency in general, what I think they should look to do tomorrow, certain guys they might want to think about going after, et cetera, et cetera. We've been talking about free agency quite a bit, but we got one more session here before the thing actually happens and free agency is upon us. And also, there seem to be some reports out there that Vladislav Gavrikov is going to be a New York Ranger. I mean, that's kind of been, all signs have kind of been pointing that way recently, but this makes it sound almost like it's a done deal, so we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. But we begin with Will Culie, who I believe, whether we're talking about players on the roster, players that the Rangers want to bring to the New York Rangers, this is at the top of the checklist for the New York Rangers. This is the most important thing that's going on, the most important storyline for the New York Rangers right now, and that is the future of Will Culie with this team, and more specifically, the possibility that he could end up being the recipient of an offer sheet. As of right now, as of this recording, this could change. By the time I post this, by the time we're done here, this could change. But as of right now, there is no new contract in place for Will Culie. And for anybody that needs a refresher, his 3-year ELC concluded at the end of this past season. It carried a cap hit of $828K per season. And Culie, as of right now, like I said, remains a restricted free agent. And it's starting to get a little bit scary because of, like we said, there is that looming threat of an offer sheet. Something else that's kind of interesting that I want to mention right off the bat here before we kind of dive into Will Culie and what an offer sheet would entail and what the Rangers have to do to make sure he sticks around. It's kind of a subplot of this entire situation. Another restricted free agent that right up there with Will Culie was one of the most likely players to be coveted by another team and potentially be the recipient of an offer sheet, and that was Matthew Knies. I would say, unfortunately for the Rangers, he came to an agreement with the Toronto Maple Leafs to stay in Toronto for the foreseeable future. Knies and the Leafs just agreed to a 6-year deal at $7.75 million per season. So anybody that's looking to offer sheet a player, that's one less option. And all eyes, not all eyes, but a lot of eyes are going to be on Will Culie as a result of that. So that didn't really do the Rangers any favor either. As far as like that framework for a contract, though, 6 years at $7.75 million, I would do that for Will Culie. And I realize this is a team that has handed out some long-term deals. Some of them look awesome. Some of them don't look so good. They've been burned in the past, but you look at what Will Culie did last year, look at the brand of hockey that he's been playing ever since he's really been on the Rangers and the considerable upside that he still possesses. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think Will Culie, if you sign him long-term, you're going to be feeling really good about. We'll also do this, just a quick rundown of how offer sheets work, and we'll use Will Culie as an example, given the fact that we're obviously talking about him. Offer sheets apply to restricted free agents, and with Culie, another team can offer sheet him. And what that means is they extend a contract offer. If a team does that and Will Culie signs the offer sheet, then the Rangers would have exactly 1 week to match that offer. If the Rangers match the offer, Will Culie stays a New York Ranger, signed, sealed, and delivered, but the Rangers would have to match it. If the Rangers do not match that offer, then they would get draft pick compensation. How much draft pick compensation depends on how much money is offered to Will Culie. The more money that's offered to him by the other team, if he ends up going to that other team, the more draft pick compensation there would be. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share on screen for those of you on YouTube the breakdown of this year's offer sheet and all the different tiers that there are. And if you're on audio, don't worry, I've got you covered. I'll talk you through it. I've shared this sheet a couple of times during the offseason here. But I do think it's certainly worth bringing up again, given the situation that the Rangers are currently in. And as you can see there, the first two tiers, 1.5 million or less, or between 1.5 and 2.3 million or less. It's not going to be that low. If somebody was to offer sheet Culie, there's only three tiers that I could realistically see happening, and they're the three right in the middle there. It's possible somebody offer sheets him between 2.34 million and 4.68 million, in which case the compensation for the Rangers would be a second round pick if they fail to match that offer. The next tier up is between 4.68 million and 7.02 million. And in that situation, if the Rangers failed to match the offer sheet at that level, then the Rangers would get a first and third round pick in exchange for, Will Culie leaving. That's the tier that I think we have to be the most concerned about, because if they offer sheet him at the level where the compensation is a second rounder and the average annual value is between 2.3 million or 4.68 million, then I think the Rangers for sure would match that offer. And honestly, even at this level right here, between 4.68 million and 7.02 million, I think the Rangers could, should, and will do everything in their power to match that offer as well. I know that that's, a little bit steep for Will Culie, especially when you look at his offensive numbers over the years. I mean, he's not even a half point per game player thus far in his career. But with Culie, it's more about the brand of hockey, and it's about that upside, and it's about the fact that, man, we need more Will Culies on this team, certainly not less of them. One of the most promising young players on the New York Ranger roster, and a bright spot on this team last season that was sorely, sorely lacking as it pertains to bright spots. So that would get a little bit difficult there, again, between 4.68 million and 7.02 million. But I think the Rangers, again, could, should, and would do whatever they have to do. Trade this guy, trade that guy, whatever you have to do to create enough cap space to match that offer, keep Will Culie with the New York Rangers. And there's only one other conceivable level that I could see Will Culie being offer sheeted at, and that would be between 7.02 million and 9.36 million per season. I don't think a team is going to go that high, because that's a lot of money, not to mention the fact that the compensation at that level would be a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick to the New York Rangers. And honestly, I mean, even the Rangers would have something to think about at that point. Like, do we really want to go up that high for Will Culie and not take these three draft picks that we're going to get? I hope it doesn't come to that. I think most likely what you're going to see is him get offer sheeted somewhere in that second tier that I talked about, between 4.68 million, 7.02 million. And if that's the case, then I think the Rangers would certainly look to match at that point. And the other thing to keep in mind here, too, is that a solution for the Rangers, rather, is that they could get ahead of this and try to get Will Culie signed long-term. And if it's up to me, I would go to the full 8 years for Will Culie. I would offer Will Culie a contract extension right now for 8 years. That would hopefully keep the average annual value down a little bit. Obviously, Will Culie is very handsomely compensated. There is a little bit of risk involved because, again, he hasn't been an offensive juggernaut, and for the most part, he's been in a bottom six role, but you're banking on him continuing to get better, and if nothing else, you're banking on him bringing that effort, that straight line hockey that the Rangers so sorely lack, that big time hitting, that physical play, over 300 hits last season. You're banking on that. Will Culie bringing that to the rink every single night. And everything about Will Culie that we can go by, watching him play his first couple of years in the league, it would certainly seem that that's the case. And if the Rangers were to offer him an 8-year deal, I think there's a decent chance that he would sign that. Next season, the most you can offer an in-house free agent is 7 years, but right now they can still offer him 8, and I think the Rangers should take advantage of that while they can. As far as how I think this is going to play out, I do think this happens. I do think somebody offer sheets Will Culie. I think it's in that second tier like I was talking about, and I think the Rangers match it. And as far as potentially having to open up some cap space, whatever it takes, within reason. If you need to give away Carson Soucy for nothing, essentially just a salary dump to some other team, then you do it. That's not going to look great because the Rangers in a lost season last year just gave up a third-round draft pick to acquire Carson Soucy. If you give him away for nothing, or even if you're forced to attach a sweetener to it, then that's not going to look great. But if it keeps Will Culie on the New York Rangers, you do it. Other options, K'Andre Miller. Now, if you were to trade Miller, it wouldn't really save you cap space because he's not under contract right now. But if a result of keeping Will Culie long-term is to part ways with K'Andre Miller, I would certainly do that as well. Other options, I mean, I wouldn't really want to trade Braden Schneider, but if it comes down to Culie or Schneider, I think certainly you go with Culie. Then, I mean, if somebody really goes high as far as their offer sheet to Will Culie, you start to get into some dire straits here. I mean, would you trade Lafreniere? Would you trade Trocheck? I wouldn't really want to do that, but I mean, you got to keep Will Culie in the fold, I think, at pretty much all costs. So it's an interesting situation. It's a dicey situation for Ranger fans, and hopefully there's a resolution sooner rather than later. And Will Culie, stays in the fold. I do think they'll figure out a way to get it done, but it might also cost them in some other areas. You might not be able to hang on to this guy, or you might not be able to go after that guy in free agency. So it's a very delicate balance right now. Rangers are walking a tightrope as it pertains to the salary cap, but be that as it may, I think priority number one for the Rangers in the next couple of days here is you make sure that you keep Will Culie in the fold. So in just a second, where I keep everything rolling, I want to switch our attention to Vladislav Gavrikov and the fact that it's looking like, I mean, done deal is a bit of a stretch. It's never done until it's done, right? And there are some other things going on with the cap where you're not even sure if he can fit under the cap yet. We'll elaborate on all that and the Rangers' chances of signing Gavrikov in just a second, and also, just if that's a good idea. We'll get to all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. FanDuel is the best. Whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel will make it feel like you are part of the action. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even the regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers. As always, we've got free agency beginning tomorrow, Tuesday at noon Eastern time. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a very special live edition of Locked On New York Rangers. We're going to go live right around 11:50 or so. Right around there. We'll kind of get warmed up, and then all the craziness begins, and we'll react to the Rangers signing this guy, signing that guy in real time. We'll see how it all goes. We will also, going forward, have more episodes talking about the players the Rangers drafted just a couple of days ago here in the NHL draft. We already did one on Malcolm Spence, who the Rangers obviously took in the second round. I think that's a great pick by the Rangers. They got him later than they should have been able to by just about every account. But if you want my thoughts on Spence, you can go back to the episode before this one. With the other draftees by the Rangers, we'll take our time with that. We'll spread out a little bit. They're not going anywhere, so we'll give them all the attention they deserve and break down their credentials and what the future might hold for them with the New York Rangers. But for right now, let's go ahead and shift our attention to Vladislav Gavrikov and the question of whether or not this is actually a done deal. There was a source in a recent Vince Mercogliano article that told Vince that Gavrikov to the Rangers is a done deal. This begs a lot of different questions. Can the Rangers figure out a way to sign Gavrikov while also keeping Will Culie, while also potentially keeping K'Andre Miller? Probably not. You might be able to do that if you can trade Carson Soucy. Here's the problem with Soucy, though, other than the fact that he just didn't play very well with the Rangers. Although, to be fair, he walked into a dumpster fire, so what do you expect? But if the Rangers want to trade Carson Soucy, it shouldn't be that difficult to get a team to take him, even if it's for a mid to late round draft pick, even if that's all it is and it's a straight salary dump by the Rangers. That shouldn't be that difficult. But the problem is that all these things I'm talking about, Miller is still unsigned, and the Rangers want to sign Gavrikov, and Will Culie, he needs his new contract, right? Other teams are aware of the fact that the Rangers are in that situation. So any team that the Rangers go to about acquiring Soucy in a trade, they're going to play hardball, and they're going to drag their feet a little bit, and they're going to say, well, maybe we'll take Soucy, but you're going to have to toss us a draft pick along with him. And that's a tough situation to be in. Hopefully there's a team out there, even if I would trade Soucy if you could keep Culie and get Gavrikov. And I have mixed feelings on Gavrikov. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But if those are the moves you feel you have to do, if you have to re-sign Culie, sign Gavrikov, re-sign Miller, then I would take like a 6th-round pick for Susie, because you just have to rid yourself of that cap hit and make sure there's enough room to do the things that you feel like you need to do. Something else that this article talks about, if the Rangers were to go with 22 players on the roster instead of 23, which typically is the norm for this team, you can save some cap space there. Vince in his article also mentioned that 2 or 3 of this group of 5 players on the Rangers would probably start this upcoming season in the AHL. Berard, Othman, Parsonen, Perreault, and Robertson. So that also creates a little bit of cap space. Not a ton, because none of those guys are, breaking the bank. But at that point, the Rangers would then have about $15 million in cap space to sign 3 or 4 players. And again, it depends on whether you go with 22 or 23 players on the roster this upcoming season. And for what it's worth, I've been opining that I think the Rangers could, should, and will keep Will Culie in the fold if it comes down to an offer sheet. Somebody else offer sheets him. But Vince did mention this. I love the quote that Vince went with here. He said, they will match an offer sheet, very likely will match an offer sheet unless, quote, some other team goes bonkers with the average annual value. And that's the one fear that you have, that some team would just throw all kinds of money at Culie, part ways with all these different draft picks. If there's a team that has a bunch of cap space and a team that has a bunch of draft capital in seasons to come, you could see something like that happen. And that's when it gets really dicey for the Rangers. So it is definitely a balancing act right now, I think is the best way to put it. But back to Gavrikov here. So when it comes to the Rangers signing him or not, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I mean, if you have the cap space for it, I guess it's okay, but there's a couple of reasons against it that I've talked about in the past, and I'll mention those in just a second. Let's start with the good, though, because you can make a strong argument for signing Gavrikov. I know there's certainly some people listening to this, watching this, that would like the Rangers to do exactly that. And, I certainly hear you. To begin with, the very most basic reason I can throw out there as far as why it might be a good idea to sign Gavrikov in free agency is it very simply makes the Rangers a better team. When you look at the Ranger defensemen, they struggled mightily this past season as a whole. It just was not a pretty season for the Ranger defensemen. And there will be a couple of guys that have left and some new guys and whatnot, but it was not a good year for the Ranger blue liners. There's also uncertainty on the blue line going forward. You don't know, who's going to be here in just a couple of seasons. Could go a lot of different ways. Gavrikov would shore a lot of that up. And something else I'll throw out there too. Gavrikov, in all likelihood, on opening night, if he was signed by the Rangers, would line up right next to Adam Fox. And at that point, you've got Adam Fox with arguably the best defense partner that he's ever played with. Likely is the best defense partner that he's ever played with. I say likely because I think people forget how much Fox and Lindgren clicked in the first few years that they were together. And obviously things went south this past season with Ryan Lindgren. But be that as it may, this might possibly be the best defense partner that Adam Fox has ever had to work with if the Rangers were to sign Gavrikov. Also, something else you could say in favor of it, this is pretty on brand with what the Rangers are doing. They are doing an aggressive retool. You can't really call this a teardown rebuild. It's different from when the letter went out, so many years ago, 7 or 8 years, whatever it was. They are retooling. They are keeping some of the guys that are part of this core, some of which they have no choice but to keep. Mika Zibanejad comes to mind. But there's a lot of, the old guard that's still here, but they are retooling around these guys. They are trying to build a different type of team, a team that's more north-south, a team that's bigger, more physical, all that good stuff. You bring in JT Miller, that's not a tear-down rebuild, giving up what the Rangers gave up in the trade for JT Miller. That's basically like, okay, we need to play the way that guy plays. That was the whole idea to that whole thing. So the idea that they're retooling rather than rebuilding, that also gives you more of a reason to sign somebody like Gavrikov. Because again, the Rangers are planning on going for it this upcoming season. They want to contend. They want to be right back there in the mix. And they're seemingly of the opinion that this past season was a fluke. They need to do a couple of things differently, and they'll be right back in business. Whether or not that happens or not, that remains to be seen. But again, signing Gavrikov would be very on brand with what the Rangers have been doing over the past calendar year or so. But as I was saying, as I've been saying all along, not the biggest fan of signing Gavrikov in free agency because, first of all, the problem that we talked about earlier with Will Culie, if you sign Gavrikov and somehow let Will Culie get away, I mean, what are we even doing? Will Culie is your homegrown young prospect. It's one of your few high draft picks that's actually going to work out, that's actually playing a brand of hockey that we all like. You can't let Will Culie get away to bring in Gavrikov. Are you kidding me? So there's that. Secondly, and I've been saying this since we started looking at free agency this offseason. There are certain guys in this year's class that are destined to be overpaid because two reasons, really. First of all, it's a thin free agent market. So if you need somebody, you've got other competition. You might have to kind of reach for somebody, give them more money and more term than you'd otherwise be comfortable giving them. But that's what you have to do to fend off, the other potential suitors for that player. So there's that. But then also the fact that the cap is rising. And on one hand, the rising cap, that's a way that you could justify a signing like Gavrikov. On the other hand, though, yes, the cap is rising. The cap is not infinite. There is still a salary cap, and you still do have tough decisions to make. And I don't know, that'd be a tough one to go 7 years, or that's the maximum, the 7 years for Gavrikov. I think you could end up getting yourself into some trouble with a contract like that. Third, and I've talked about this in the past as well, I don't want the Rangers to miss out on next year's UFA class because they're paying boatloads of money to Vladislav Gavrikov. Gavrikov is a very good defenseman. He is somebody that can help the Rangers team. He is somebody that can make this team better. He's not a superstar. He's not a perennial Norris candidate. Not even close. Very good defenseman. See, this to me, the Rangers' infatuation with Gavrikov and maybe even Provorov is like a plan B. It just kind of reeks of, well, they're the best lefty defenseman available, so let's go get them. And I understand that to a degree, but is this really your guy, or is it just because there's no better options available? So let's overpay him and sign him for like 7 years. If it's the latter, then you got to pump the brakes a little bit, in my very humble opinion. But again, this UFA class next year is bananas, to put it mildly. You've got McDavid. You've got Kempe. You've got Jason Robertson. Jack Eichel becomes a free agent next offseason. You might have another shot at him if you want to go that route. Kirill Kaprizov, UFA as well. Do you really want to miss out on the Rangers sending one or maybe even two of these guys next offseason because you're paying enormous amounts of money to Gavrikov? Like I've said in the past, I'm out on that. Another reason here, I think we're up to like number 4 here. Gavrikov is going to turn 30 in November. It's not ancient. He's still got a lot of good hockey in front of him. Cool. But the problem is, by all accounts, all signs are pointing to Gavrikov signing a pretty long-term deal. And if he leaves LA, then the most he can sign for is 7 years. He might very well get that 7 years. Let's just say the Rangers sign him, right? Okay, 7 years. Gavrikov will be almost 37 when his contract expires. And I understand that in free agency, sometimes if you want to get your guy, this is what you have to do, right? You have to overpay him, in terms of dollars. You have to overextend him in terms of years. That's how you separate yourself from the other potential teams that are interested in this player or in that player. So I understand why that happens. But are you really going to do that for Gavrikov? Like, if it's a superstar player, okay, I get it. Yeah, we'll sign somebody who's a star player, a point per game player, just an all-star every season. We'll sign that guy for 7 years, knowing that year 6 and year 7 might not be looking quite as good. He might be slowing down by then. You'll make that sacrifice for a superstar player. You're going to do that with Gavrikov? Again, a good player, but I don't think that you sign somebody to an expensive long-term contract where the end of it might not be looking good for a player like Gavrikov. And it's nothing against Gavrikov. I just don't look at him as like that superstar player where you would make that sacrifice. One other thing that I'll throw out there too, as far as like why I'm not really feeling it, and this is just my own little thing, maybe some of you share this with me, probably some PTSD from other free agent defensemen that the Rangers have signed over the years. I mean, think about this list. Big name players that were going to come over here and make a big difference, and it didn't go that way. Wade Redden, there's a rule named after Wade Redden where you can't bury players in the AHL the way that you used to be able to. Somebody like Tom Poti, Patrick Nemeth, Kevin Shattenkirk. You could even throw Jacob Trouba into that list. Now, I realize with Trouba, it was technically a trade, but the Rangers immediately extended him, to that big money long-term deal, and it didn't really work out, if we're being completely honest. So, there's that to consider as well. And again, none of this is personal against Gavrikov. If he can go out and get all this money, then, good for him. But I just feel like the Rangers are going to overextend themselves with Gavrikov if they do end up signing him. He does make them better, but you can't get too carried away in terms of what this contract looks like if you're the Rangers, at least in my opinion. Maybe some of you feel differently. Certainly let me know in the YouTube comments. But we're going to keep everything going in just a second. Free agent frenzy begins 24 hours from now. Going to talk a little bit about the Rangers' potential approach in said free agency, and we'll get to that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Want to go ahead and just talk about free agency in general. and what the Rangers' approach could, should, and will be once, it all starts hitting the fan tomorrow at noon Eastern time. So if the Rangers sign Gavrikov, which it sounds like they're going to, don't look for them to do any other things out of house. I can't imagine the Rangers are going to sign Gavrikov and then make another big splash in free agency. And honestly, again, with Gavrikov, we could debate whether that's like a big move or not. I mean, I guess it is. He's somebody that you would bring in, long-term contract. You'd stick him on your first defense pairing, and he does make the team better, like I was saying. But that's going to be it. If they sign Gavrikov, I can't see them in any way, signing any other big-name player, especially when you still have to get Will Culie under contract, and maybe even K'Andre Miller if you want to keep him around. And I'm good with them trading Miller, but we'll see. I think Miller could end up actually back on a one-year deal. We'll see how that whole thing plays out. The other thing to consider here is that means that the Rangers, if it goes the way that we think it's going to go and they sign Gavrikov, you got to play some money puck. You got to go out there, if you're Chris Drury, the Ranger brass, and you got to find some players that are going to exceed their value, because it's just going to be patchwork after that. You're going to see a lot, or at least a few, Rangers signings tomorrow, I believe. There will be for 1 year, for $800K, $1 million, 1.1 million, 1.2 million, somewhere in that ballpark. So are there some players out there that are kind of unheralded, under the radar a little bit, that will be signed for pretty cheap, that can fill some kind of a void on this Ranger team? Is there a way to find somebody for cheap who's like a really strong forechecker? God knows the Rangers didn't do a good enough job on the forecheck this past season. Is there somebody who you can find for relatively inexpensive that gives you a little bit more physicality or a little bit more size, or both of those things? That would be great. Is there some cheap speed out there? We've talked about how the Rangers, again, I've used this phrase in the past or whatever, but not necessarily a fast team, not necessarily a slow team. There's not too many burners on the New York Rangers. So can you find somebody for kind of cheap who's like, you can create stuff off of the rush and really fly into the offensive zone and give opposing defenders fits in that way? That's at least possible. This is where you earn your money as a general manager. Can you find those diamonds in the rough? Can you find those guys that have been undervalued around the league? We actually did an episode not too long ago where we took a look at 5 pending UFAs who at the time I believed you could sign for $2 million or less in free agency. It would at least be possible to do this. The 5 players that I mentioned, and I still have interest, at least some interest in all these guys. None of them are perfect players. Please understand that. But as far as guys that you can find for cheap, John Merrill, cheap lefty defenseman who's got some pretty promising metrics in his favor. You could put him on the third pairing and just kind of round out your lineup that way for relatively inexpensive. Max Pacioretty kind of revitalized himself a little bit with the Leafs. He's a shoot-first kind of a player that the Rangers seem to lack. I had Sean Corrali, just one of those, hard-nosed, no-nonsense players. Corey Perry, honestly, I don't know that you're going to get him for $2 million or less. I know he just turned 40 and everything, but he really played well for Edmonton this past season and had a strong playoff run as well. I know he loses in the Stanley Cup final every year, but if you get him for cheap, I think that's something to at least think about, somebody that could round out your top 9, give this team a little bit more edge. And Steven Lorentz, I mean, I like him as like a 12th or 13th forward, but this guy's a giant, plays very physical hockey, and added a little bit more offense to his game this past season as well. Again, these are just 5 ideas, just tossing them out there. None of them are a perfect player. None of them are going to guarantee the Rangers go to the Stanley Cup final next season, but you get what I'm saying here. You got to go bargain hunting. You got to go to the dollar store. You got to find some guys that will give you a nice return on your investment. Those are 5 guys that are under the radar free agents that I think the Rangers should at least look at. If you've got some diamonds in the rough that you like as well, again, feel free to let me know about it in the YouTube comment section for sure. And one more thing I'll say about the general approach to free agency for the New York Rangers is that I would favor 1-year deals. And it goes back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier here today, that being that next year's free agent class is absolutely wild. So if you can get somebody on a 1-year deal, do some patchwork that way, that's great. But I don't want to see too many players come in on multiple year deals, because next season is when you can really go wild in free agency. You get the Panarin contract coming off the books as well. I mean, Panarin, I guess, could be re-signed. That's a whole nother conversation. That's at least possible. But man, I mean, you've got some serious superstars in next year's free agent class. And I would hate for the Rangers to miss out on 1 or 2 of those guys, because we're paying good but not great players like they're elite players coming out of this year's free agency. Hopefully that makes sense, but let me know your thoughts on that as well. Some other interesting bit of news here is that the Rangers announced their development camp roster. We're going to break that down in a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers as well. It's pretty much everybody that you would expect, all the young players in the Rangers pipeline, including some of the guys that they just drafted. So we've got that to look forward to. I believe it starts in early July, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, we'll break that down in greater detail in a future episode. And one more bit of news is that qualifying offers to restricted free agents are due at 5 p.m. today. Those who do not receive one will become unrestricted free agents. And as far as like the Ranger roster is concerned, the only two I could see possibly not receiving a qualifying offer, I think, you never know for sure, but the two that are at least candidates would be Zach Jones and Arthur Kaliev. And Kaliev was just a waiver claim. Jones, I mean, they just don't have any plans for him. It's become pretty obvious that, as I've said in the past, he gets to play when there are no other options, and that's pretty much it. Still think he'll get one. Still think he'll get a qualifying offer, but we will see. Then there's some guys in the Wolf Pack that might be candidates to not get a qualifying offer as well, but we'll keep our eye on that, and we'll talk about that in some episodes going forward as well. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @JChick17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.